Welcome to Update Brazil. Here I am again with Jeff Nyquist and special from my country, Brazil, Luis Orleans in Bragança. And Jeff,
yes,
we have talked about civil disobedience. How's it going, Jeff?
it's going good, Alan. Your feed is a little bit choppy right at the moment, so hopefully that sound will get better. And Luis, please tell us a little bit about yourself so that the audience can get to know you.
Please, your microphone. Sorry.
Sorry, Luis. Yeah, we're not getting any sound suddenly. Okay, good. All right, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm Brazilian national. I was born in Brazil and raised in the American educational system. Graduated also in business here in Brazil. Went for a master's in political science in Stanford University. I gave up on the idea of being a politician or being a scholar, so I went into the private sector for 20 years and had an MBA subsequently and internationally in France. And so I've been basically in the private sector for 20 years. And recently, over the past year, realized that it was pretty obvious that the government here in Brazil was taking a turn to a point where it's very worrisome, and so I decided to get myself engaged. I realized that there were more people like me in Brazil, so there is a critical mass of people that have a certain awareness that change needs to happen, and the idea is basically that the system is slowly but surely becoming a totalitarian state. It's been preying on the poor and preying on issues that affect the poor mostly in order to build their base, and they're using that in order to harness more and more power, and concentrating a lot more power than before, probably than ever before in the history of this country. We have a traditional issue of being a centralized government since the beginning of our inception as a free country, since our first constitution in the 1800s. So we've always been a centralized government, and we never really were effective on decentralizing, which is something that the U.S. was born a decentralized country, so that that gave it a little bit more leverage as far as political power is concerned. Decentralized political power. So that centralization caused a lot of big business to be associated with government in order to sustain themselves over the years. So we've always been, government and big business have always been together since the inception of Brazil, and that has, now in the more recent 12, 20 years, that has grown to a level where we're basically this is not a capitalistic society. We have basically big businesses together with government putting together regulation to protect the big businesses, whereas the small and middle-sized businesses, they suffer from all the regulation and have no subsidies and basically have all the intricacies of a socialist system. So that's basically what we're having right now. So at the current situation, we are in a political legitimacy problem. The current government is not able to sustain its legitimacy. It's doing that via totalitarian, disruptive incursions of the three powers: the executive, influencing on the legislative, some also influencing on the judiciary system. The judiciary system also influencing on the legislative system. So we do not have the independent powers working independently anymore. and that's it's probably it's worse than what we had a year ago, where we thought we had the three powers separately. We thought we had institutions that were operating freely. So the current scenario is where everything is a big lie. You have we're not a republic. We're basically owned by a few 200 big companies. We're not a federal system. We're basically a unitary system based on one central power. We're not by any means a democracy. Everything that is considered to be a definition of democracy, free elections and a transparent system, that does not exist in Brazil anymore. So everything is sort of covered, and the media has been bought by the government, also via legislation that permits government to use tax revenues to pay for its own media. So it ends up doing its own propaganda. So and the state-owned companies, which in itself is something that we should have gotten rid of 20 years ago. We maintained them, and actually we increased their number. So now we have an enormous amount of state-owned companies with monopolies. So you have price controls and all that. So we're basically a socialist country. But on the facade that we are a globalized economy and that we're one of the BRICS and that we have everything going for us, but we really don't have a system that actually reflects anything that what we say that we are. And in the current situation as we speak, we are entrenched. So the government is entrenched in its position. It's not wanting to budge on the will of the people. That many independent surveys have been brought to the mainstream media, where the overwhelming majority of people do not want this government to maintain itself, to be sustained anymore. They want them out, and that's not happening. They're basically destroying the republic, what's left of a republic, in order to protect themselves, and it's getting increasingly worse. We have also now censorship laws that might be passed, might criminalize even what I'm doing right now. So we have many of these small little legislations that are concentrating even more government and creating even more distance between the government and civil society. So we're basically in a dictatorship situation. We haven't declared it yet. We need to be more public about it, more international about it, coming out with this message. But we are definitely in a dictatorship scenario, the state versus the people. So that's what we're facing.
What you're saying is that the checks and balances have broken down.
Absolutely. No checks and balances whatsoever. Actually, we had one institution recently that it was a surprise to all of Brazil, and it was as if we had just won the World Cup. We basically had a situation where there's one of the agencies that controls the accounts for the executive branch and the legislative, and basically understands what happens. It's basically it's a budget committee, and they rejected the accounts that were proposed by the executive branch for last year's managerial reports, and basically so they rejected the reports from the executive as far as what they perform, and Brazil society went wild as far as we were in disbelief that we still had any sort of checks and balances. But to our dismay, that branch of government has no real effective political power. It's basically how would I say? It's basically a consulting committee that gives their point of view of how should we treat the government numbers. And so we're now again at crossroads as who's going to take that information and use it as political leverage because it's obvious that there were a lot of corruption taking place in the executive branch, and actually all the other branches of a government, where this party has their cronies, and so that seemed to be very obvious. But again, because they have control over the three powers, now the judiciary system actually went into the legislative system in order to block any attempt of an impeachment, which seemed to be like another dictatorial move. Now it's one branch getting involved in another branch, and on the due process of this one branch, and they shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't be able to do that. But
so they're covering up for each other.
Absolutely. So you have the same party dominating all three powers. So, and that's the situation where you don't really have a chief of state in Brazil. You have the concentration of, which is similar to what you have in the U.S. You have the chief of state and the chief of government. They are the same person. They are the president. You don't have like a fourth power. In the U.S., you have probably a freer media, and you have your military as a more of a they represent the sovereign the people, whereas the military here represents the state. So we're not really protected by anybody.
Let me explain how the military works in the United States. Military officers in the United States swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. It's very interesting. To uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And of course, you're taught when you're in military school, whether it's officer candidate school or you're in West Point or whatever, you're taught do not follow an illegal order. I think I'm getting a slight echo from your speakers, Luis.
Let me put it on mute.
The interesting thing is, I know in Brazil that you had a problem with communism in the 1960s, and you had a dictatorship that lasted about 20 years. I've heard that the army in Brazil is not exactly politically oriented. Perhaps its commanders have been replaced by the government, by people that they want. So the only thing you really have in terms of constitutional change is that the people are aroused against a government that is not legitimate, that is usurping the power. And so this is the only thing you can do. I mean, would you say that it's correct to say that there's been a revolution in Brazil from on top, that the ruling party has created a revolution, is overthrowing the Constitution in the state, and that what the people are doing is they're wanting a counter-revolution to put things back? Would that be accurate?
That is very accurate. The one problem is that our Constitution is the problem. So whereas in the United States you have a very free and a very principled Constitution, our latest Constitution, we had 7 constitutions since we began our journey as a country. So in this 7th version, the one that's the 6th within the Republic, it's basically a socialist, communist/communist constitution, where all these where the libertarians and the liberal rights and basically, now I'm talking liberals from the U.S. point of view, they had their share within that constitution. So people have a lot of rights, the right to work, right to be happy, and the right to whatever, and the government is supposed to give them those rights, assure that they are able to use those rights. So in that interpretation, you become a totalitarian state. So the letter of the Constitution has to be readdressed. The actual written language and the words that they choose has to be rewritten, and also many of the principles and the ideals that are within the Constitution have to be either removed or inserted new ideals, because the current constitution will always work for the type of government that we actually see in power today.
Can the government
yes,
use...
society is picking up again, meaning there's a civil society awareness now, and that's been a positive effect.
You're familiar with what happened in Ukraine last year, the revolution. I just saw the documentary Winter on Fire, which is about how that escalated, and I followed the Orange Revolution that had happened a decade earlier. I followed it very closely, and one of the things that interested me was the civil disobedience, the very disciplined civil disobedience of the Ukrainian people, occupying Maidan Square, being very peaceful, insisting on their rights. It was really interesting how the government escalated the violence in Ukraine, and the people then responded by defending themselves. And it was really not possible for the army and ultimately even the police to cope with the situation, because the people were perceived as being justified. Do you think the government in Brazil would escalate violence against large crowds of people, or is it just simply impossible in Brazilian political culture to do that?
No, it's possible. However, you have to. That's one of the things that we were dabbling with, that idea of actually becoming like a large-scale mass movement and take hold of our capital. But imagine the United States, and you place the capital not in Washington D.C., but you placed it in the Midwest, somewhere in Iowa. Not sure, like really centrally located in the middle of nowhere. So access to that capital and to actually make that political statement where people are taking over the power and blockading the central government in their buildings, that becomes kind of very difficult logistically. It's how do you get all the people from the different states of Brazil to populate this capital that's very far away?
Because Brasilia is in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah, but it's not the jungle. It's called the Cerrado. It's like this. It's not barren land, but it's like a little bit more like a grasslands. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as easy to access. There are not that many big cities around the capital, so it's a little bit isolated. And the city itself was designed by a communist, so there's really no. It's like very spread out, and it's not scaled to the human factor. I mean, it's scaled for like more of like a Russian military parade. So it's hard for you to get that. If you put like 10,000 people in close to the government hall, that means nothing. It's like there's nobody there because it's so spread out, and you really need like 500,000 to 1 million people or even more in order for you to create like a real big, large-scale movement and actually create some effect. So that has happened 2 years ago, 2013. That happened spontaneously. It wasn't organized, but to do it again in an organized fashion, that seems to be a little bit of a challenge. And there are many different groups that are challenge. Basically, they compete for the attention of this public, and they want to be the leaders of this revolution. And they probably all saw movies, and they want to be the protagonist heroes of that movement. But I think in the end, time is already converging these groups into smaller groups. We had many before. Now we actually have 3 large ones that command the streets. They still cannot work independently of each other. They sort of have to be together. But I think that we need to think of like symbolic statements that would show that the government has no more power, rather than actually take hold of the government physically, like you had like in these small European countries where you have like the capital is everything is centralized in the capital. So it's a lot easier to do that in a small country. Whereas here we have this federal challenge. We're organized as a federal country, but we're not, we're not really federal in our behavior as far as judicially is concerned. So we have both problems.
Still answering this question,
yeah,
Jeff.
Go ahead, Alan.
Still answering this question. One fact that makes Brazilian situation very different than the Ukrainian situation is the propaganda that socialism made against the police officers here in Brazil. So for a long time, the Workers' Party and all the socialist parties, the communist parties, of course linked and connected with Foro de São Paulo, they have been making a lot of propaganda against the police, against the police, and this is the disadvantage for us, because wherever we support the police officers, we are not socialist at all, and the police officer recognize that, because on media the socialist propaganda is, it's just making them look horrible and bad guys, corrupted, and so on. And when we start to supporting them, I think this is the point that makes the big difference between the Ukrainian situation, the violence situation that happened in Ukraine, and what we had in Brazil during these 3 big protests that we made. So all these 3 protests, we took pictures with the police officers, and they share this same feeling that we are under the dictatorship power. So I do believe in this protest that we are organizing October 28th, I do believe the police officers will support us. The problem is the national force. The national force in Brazil was created by the Communist Party, the Workers' Party, and all the Foro de São Paulo's parties. They created this national force the same way Chavez made in Venezuela. So we are afraid more of the national force than our state police officers. We do believe all the police from the states will support us, as they are doing so far. They have doing that so far. But
what about the Army? Will the Army support you?
Well, basically, we do believe that Army can support us, but we are not sure, because they are praising all the ministers that Dilma is changing or putting ahead of them. So that's what makes us afraid a little bit. But honestly, we know that they will not support the Workers' Party if they will turn it into a really dictatorship like in Venezuela. We already started, but that's not done yet. I do believe that when they will do that, the Army will answer them somehow. That's what I believe. I don't know if Luis agrees with me or not.
What do you think, Luis?
I think we let me see. Yeah, I think we thwarted their plans a little bit, but their plans have not changed. I think their plans just got sped up by the fact that we're now aware and that we're moving against them. So now they're pushing ahead a little bit quicker and with a little bit more haste than before. Whereas before they had popularity, and before they had, they were passing along all these measures that were creating the dictatorship to exactly the modes of a Venezuela type of regime. But the fact that civil society rose like last year sort of made them a little bit more. Now we stopped them in their tracks a little bit in a few issues, but they started speeding up wherever they can on other issues that we're not seeing. Many intra-constitutional measures have been taken, in spite of the media, even the paid media, showing them and so forth. So there's a lot of these things happening, And the thing is that every day that goes by, the list of things that we need to fight against as far as civil society in order to be transparent and to have a dialogue and to actually control government, every day that goes by, we actually have a bigger list to fight, because they went ahead and had this judicial tsunami of measures that passed in a very short period. So we're now faced with an even bigger challenge because of the fact that the military has not done anything, has not intervened. You know, they probably have a couple of things. I would say that the military here is well, three things. One is, historically they seem to be a little bit with the lower morale than before, because they had a 20-year period that they were the ones that were holding power, and we basically broke through from that dictatorship regime, and now we went through a sort of democratic populistic cycle, and that has been very negative on the previous history. So they don't really have a very good morale because of that. Second, because the current government has done everything that they could in order to not give them enough resources in order to be effective as a policing power or as a power in itself. And thirdly, is the quality. Seems that the quality of the people that are actually in the military today in Brazil are not the same quality that we had, 30, 40 years ago. They do not have the same background and studies, and they don't seem to be aware of or at least they don't seem to be as associated with the country that they should represent, or the people that they should represent. They probably are more associated to the state and the party that is in power right now. So I think that shift is happening as far as the quality of people that are in the military. So I would say that those three things are a little bit combination of these three things are at work right now.
I have a question.
Yeah, before your question.
How big is the national force? You know? How many thousands?
I have no idea.
I had the number a long time ago. I think it was 400,000. It was a long time ago.
Big? 400,000?
Yeah, it was a big number a long time ago, and I cannot state as an effect as how many there are effective as of now. I think effective is probably 100,000, and then you had reservists and also the police, the military police that are within the states. They are in effect a reservist from the army. So that's a good news, because they seem to be more pro-civil society than they are pro-central government.
How are they trained? Do you know?
They're trained militarily. So they actually are working. They are that's one of the issues that even the current government wants to fight, is that the local state police, they're not civil police, they're military police. So they are trained and they work as a military police. However, they have a constant day-to-day chore of maintaining peace within that state. So that's one of the things that the current government, they wanted to basically federalize the state police, so getting rid of all these state police, and they all become federal, and then they all become loyal to the central government. Again, centralization of their socialist regimes, they depend on central government. Point. If you have decentralization of power, it becomes a lot more difficult for them to, put forth their totalitarian schemes, and that seems to be the rule here more than the exception. In Brazil, they took a very large country, a diverse country, a country with many large cities, and they're all like spread apart, and they're basically being able to command a totalitarian regime over here by creating ever increasing centralization of power and judicial power, and also tax power. They are the biggest tax revenue is located at the central government, and it's not located at the state or at the municipal level. So that's been also one of the issues, that why people went to the streets. They pay a lot of taxes, but they don't see the return for those taxes because it's not localized. So the local administration has no revenue in order to to promote the well-being of the citizens that are paying this huge amount of taxes. So everything is going to the central government, and then some ivory tower guy is either taking that money and using it for corruption, or using it for paying other political parties for them to gain support, ever increasing support, and also to deviate that money out of the country and into other states where they probably have a better political use or political gain for that money. So that's what the synopsis of our scenario.
And I would like to add the fact that we are not afraid about army, Jeff. We are not afraid about the police, because as Luis already said, the police is military too. So we need to face not the army, but we need probably to face in future or soon the labor union and the MST, the group that are invading properties. So the situation in Ukraine and Brazil are totally different because of that. We are not going to fight against the army, not even against the police, because they are in our side. For example, Luis mentioned the reserve, the army reserve. All of them in total are absolutely against the Workers' Party. All of them.
Well, that's very similar to Ukraine. That's actually very similar to Ukraine. No, it sounds similar in certain ways. The Ukrainian government could not use the army, and they had to use mercenaries. Basically, the people that were most fighting the crowd in Maidan Square were not the police; they were the mercenaries, the Berkuts. And in your country, it sounds like this national force is the main threat to keeping the government. It's a communist method. It was used, for example, in the Czechoslovakia Revolution in the 1940s when the communists took over Czechoslovakia. The communists realized they were going to lose the next election, and they had created their own kind of militia. And so when the people went out to protest, what the government was doing, they brought out their militia, their communist militia, and they beat up the people, and the army and the police did not intervene. The army and the police just stayed out of it. So it was just strictly between the people and this communist militia. And this was what allowed the communist government to establish itself as a dictatorship in Czechoslovakia in 1948. It's very interesting because you have a similar situation as you had in Czechoslovakia in the 40s. You have a government that's become very unpopular, that's not going to be able to win an election without fraud, is what I understand. And that they're in a situation where they have to declare themselves a dictatorship, and they have to put down the popular unrest in some decisive way. And they have this instrument, the national force, to do it, so that when your people, when the Brazilian people go to the street, they can bring this out if they dare, and have a showdown with the Brazilian people. So it's something to keep in mind, that you can have this kind of situation without the army or the police getting involved. And really in Ukraine, they had, like I said, they had to use mercenaries because the government was unpopular to that degree that they had to do that. And so I would watch out in Brazil for any taking in of weapons from abroad, getting weapons from Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua that are going to try to arm this group within the country. And what is the government's propaganda right now? What is the government telling the people about the situation in Brazil?
That everything is okay. That it's temporary. It's global crisis. It has nothing to do with them locally. It's beyond even what I can relate right now to you, it's just ridiculous. It's not even worthy of us to disclaim on that. I mean, it's absolutely, totally off the reality. And not to mention, it's a big, fat lie, through and through. The good thing is that the people are not are no longer susceptible to that. They seem to be very knowledgeable that the media no longer represents a free medium of communication. So they're opting to social media. They're opting to all these other back channels for the real information. So the big losers of this whole thing, at least from right now, this situation, is the media. Every single media has been losing their credibility every day, and the bigger ones that have not defended the people, that have been defending their own purse because the government is paying out propaganda through them, so that they tell the government side of things. So they're the big losers. There's some mediums that are still relatively free, but it's sort of like a gray area. We really don't know, but we sort of rely on them a little bit. But in general, media is terrible. It's no longer a viable medium, and it's no longer representing civil society whatsoever. Anyway.
They are repeating it's a coup. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
They are repeating in the media, it's a coup everywhere. So what these people are doing is a coup. It's not legal, it's not civil, it's just a coup.
That's what they said in Ukraine. They said it was an American-backed conspiracy, a coup. Yeah, you're going to hear the same things that you heard in Ukraine. You're going to hear the same sorts of things. It seems to me that the Brazilian government, from what you've described, has run out of all credibility, all political capital, and the only thing they have left really is force and the fact that they possess nominal government authority. That you have a pre-revolutionary, or rather counter-revolutionary situation where the government's going to have to step down. But let me ask this question. How much crime, how much corruption, how many jail sentences would they be facing if they step down from power? Would they be completely vulnerable for what they've done? This is a question.
As far as numbers are concerned, is that your question?
The top leaders, I mean, have they done things in the top leadership of the Workers' Party that would get them prosecuted and put in jail?
Absolutely. Actually, this is unprecedented in Brazil, where white-collar crimes have been taken to its full course, and they've been judged. There's a special group within the district, not the district attorney, the state attorney, the attorney general department, that have been prosecuting them at a certain level of our judicial system. That he's working his way within that system in order to actually effectively take these people to jail and for them to serve sentences. And what's happening is that the federal government, the federal legislature, are setting them free. Now they're taking the reverse role of what civil society is demanding for them to do. They're all pretty much well in their. There's been a lot of people that have been arrested. There are many more that will be arrested. They're both in the political side and also on the private sector side. Mm-hmm. They will have to be arrested and processed. However, now, since all the gloves are off, the federal judges, they're setting these people free, because they're cronies from the government, and so they're not serving their full sentences, and they're taking them. So it's unprecedented that we've been jailing these people, but it's at the same time, unless we have some real new law that we are, by some miracle, with this Congress and with this judicial system, gets passed, like harder laws for punishment take place, we won't be as effective in actually cleaning Brazil for the next generation. You know, it's basically a repetition of what we had before, but it's a lot better. You know, we improved on that significantly, but there are many challenges.
The reason
after the proofs, Jeff.
Yeah.
After the proofs, there is a commentary of Laura's commentary here. I would like to share with you guys. After all the proofs, okay, the Workers' Party said, okay, we stole your money. Okay, we stole your money. All this money disappeared, but that was for social reasons. Look at this. It's a really nice commentary I would like to share with you guys. So that's what Laura says. That's so true. The government is telling us that all corruption and money that disappeared were for helping the social movement. They are systematically calling for class war. Everyone else against the miserables. I just couldn't miss this commentary that really happened. That's kind of unbelievable, you know. You prove they stole the money, and they say, okay, that happened, okay, but that for social reasons.
In our Anglo-Saxon tradition, we have a character named Robin Hood who robs from the rich and gives to the poor.
Yeah, Robin.
And he's a hero, right? Because he's giving the stuff to the poor. My point in raising this business about whether the government leaders can be prosecuted and jailed goes to the heart of power. Politics, in the end, is a question about holding power and what power can do. That power can be misused and used to get wealth, money, to hurt people, to violate and break laws, to be above the law. And of course, the great revolution that happened in Rome when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon was because Julius Caesar was subject to crimes he had committed when he was consul of Rome. And that his proconsulship was going to end in Gaul. He was going to be recalled, and that meant that he was going to stand trial. And he had command of the greatest army in the Republic at the time. So rather than facing trial, rather than giving up his office and giving up his army, Julius Caesar turned his army against Rome and marched on his own home city, native city. And this is a sort of a very important story for all republics, for all the whole civilized world. Because what you have in Brazil is you have a kind of Julius Caesar situation where they're holding power and they're committing crimes while they're in power. And the question is, they don't dare give up power because they'll have to face their crimes. And that makes them more desperate, more willing to use force. And I think it's a point to keep in mind that these people either have to flee. I mean, what happened in Ukraine was that the forces that were willing to use violence against the Maidan demonstrators were too weak. That the demonstrators said, look, you're killing us, you're shooting us down, and tomorrow at 10 a.m. the President Yanukovych is going to leave, or we're storming the government buildings. And that next morning at 6 a.m. you saw the president out there with his luggage getting ready to flee to Moscow or Rostov or wherever. I think he maybe went to Rostov first. But he fled because the option is to fight or flee depending on if you have the force. And that's the calculus that has to be made in Brazil. What are the government leaders thinking? Are they going to fight or are they going to flee? Do they realize that the game is up for them and that they've committed illegalities, or are they going to do what Julius Caesar did? Are they going to cross the Rubicon? And I don't know if you have any ideas, Luis. What do you think?
I think they face the same challenge as we do. How are they going to take over power by force of a huge country? You know? So here is, again, if here's the logistical issue. It's hard for us to take down the government, but it's also hard for them to, use power all across our nation. It's very, very hard. So we're in a détente situation, right? So I understand you fully regarding. I'm a big fan of Roman history, and you just reminded me of how important it is to bring up that experience. And I know how important that was for the founding fathers of the United States. So So I'm pretty sensitive to that. And the idea here is that we really, our challenges are a little bit different on that regard, because one, size, so it is a problem for both. How to get across that hump? How do we do that? And that's one thing, and that's a problem for either side. And I would love to understand. If I knew what they were going to do, you know, we would all obviously take action against that. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that if you look at Brazil, you know, it's hard for us to. It's hard for the Brazilian, even the Brazilian government, for even the more dictatorial moments of the Brazilian history, they have never acknowledged a dictatorship. You know, we have never been, at least within ourselves, like truly open about that. Oh, hey, look, we have a dictator or a dictatorship. Even the last dictatorship, which was sort of, it was a military junta. So it was a group that took over. It wasn't like one person. We had a dictator, a real dictatorship in the 1930s. There was one guy, one military guy taking over, taking power, and he actually created a constitution to reflect his power. So that was a true dictatorship at that. But it was a political time in history where those things were acceptable. But now, after the Second World War, after there was no more communist, at least the quote-unquote communist systems, communist dictatorships out there. At least Brazilians don't feel at ease in saying, "Hey, we have a communist dictatorship." They're gonna turn those terms around, and all of a sudden, what is communist is going to become capitalist. What it's a republic is now a dictatorship. So they're gonna redefine the terms of what a republic is, and what capitalism means, and what a federal system is, and what a democracy is. That's what they're doing. So people are very confused because they all, obviously the populace, they tend to take those terms and twist them and say that this is what democracy is, and that's what we're doing, and we're doing the right thing for the people. We're all for the people. We can't be against the people if we're doing this and this and that. And the capitalist system, those are the ones that are ruining this country, not the socialists. So there's a lot of noise that we need to flush out in order for us to understand and really begin anew. Even the mobilization right now is a little bit confused. You know, obviously you have a lot of people that understand that what we have. I think that awareness is already spans across millions of people, but we still have hundreds of million people that are not really aware. They understand that things are not good, but those big mass of people, they can be turned against what we're proposing. And with another, and still provide support for a new type of a communist or left-wing regime, which is what I see happening. I see the state entrenching themselves. They might take out a few players that are representative of the current regime, and they'll put other people that represent the same type of regime, but not on the facade. The facade is different. And people will say, okay, this is a new facade, so it must be a new government. Okay, then we're okay, because there was a shift there was a transition of power between this group and the other group. But in fact, they're both the same. So that's the challenge. It's more of a mediatic challenge. I really don't see us getting into any bloodshed. I really think it's very difficult for that to happen. I don't see that type of behavior natural of Brazilians. It would shock me if that. It might happen if they bring in external powers, like if they bring in Cubans and Venezuelans to fight their war here, like you mentioned, they become the militia, and that militia has a free reign.
They are trying to do that, Jeff. But as Philip said, the sense of people are not like this. You know, they are all against Workers' Party. The whole country, everywhere, where you go, they are against they are against the Workers' Party. That's why I would like to ask Philip to explain how we will act. We will not act just in Brasilia. We will act in all city councils throughout the country. So we will act in Brasilia. We will focus on that. But there are a lot of people that cannot go there because it's very far. Our federal district is far of everything. So there are many people that cannot go to Brasilia. So they will go to their city council in their city, and they will impose their city council to agree with us in Brasilia and support our movement. So that's what we are doing on 28th. 28th will be in Brasilia and all the cities throughout the country, all the cities.
And the goal, what is the goal of this? Is it, are you calling it a march, or what is it? How are you calling it? What is it that the goal is of this action?
We have three points, and Luis can explain us. We choose just three goals for so far, because we need to abstract everything to make people understand that easier. But Philip can talk about it.
Yeah, there's been three measures that that the public has been very interested in. The first and foremost is the impeachment of the current president. So that has been, at least from our side, from the civil society side, we have a vote of no confidence on her leadership. So it's more of a political statement than an effective criminal statement. Has she committed any crime? Has she whatever? That's something that the judicial system will provide. But there's a no confidence vote for sure from civil society. So that's one thing. That's one big thing that most Brazilians want. Second is freedom of speech. There's, over the past few weeks, a few legislations have been passed in order to criminalize freedom of speech, and obviously they went through a makeup, so we don't really. That's how they usually do things. It's not very clear. They basically it's a law against something like that seems to be very credible. But in effect, it's criminalizing freedom of speech. So there's a law that we want to see revoked. And then the third thing is that we are definitely against the electronic voting system that they put forth over the past 10, 20 years. Basically, the system has allowed for them to control the software and for them to control elections. And the government claims that the system works and that the system is not susceptible to any of these problems. So the issue is that what happens is that that's not the truth. The problem is that the system is very it's a weak system. It has been proven to fail. It has been proven to have leakages, and you can actually control the elections. And most people believe that the current president was elected as a result of electronic fraud of this system. So these three things have to be out. So considering that the federal government is not responding to our demands, we are taking all the cities and actually making them, using them as a platform, saying, look, guys, you're here, you're close to us, we can control you a little bit better than we do the federal system. So we want these three things. If you're not giving us these three things, we're going to make your life here, at least at the local level, very difficult. So we're trying to do that at the local level. So yeah, it is a bigger challenge, but it's something that we'll be able to mobilize a lot more people with a lot more that are already within the the bureaucracy of the state, and they might have an effect on the federal system as well. So we expect to use them as an army of people, of plaintiffs in our behalf.
It is interesting. You were saying before about this situation that the government could just play a game where a bunch of people leave, a new party or set of people come in, and you're really just getting the same thing. It's just that they're saying, oh, well, we're sorry, these people were bad, and now these other people are good, and they just continue doing the same. In Ukraine, that has been the pattern since 1991. Oh, look, you're free. And then, no, it's still the Soviet system. So we have a protest. Oh, now you're free. And then in 2004, I think it was the third time saying you're free, and then to be cheated again. And it took 20 years, and it did lead to violence. And still, even now, I would argue that most of the legislature and the executive branch in Ukraine are still controlled by KGB agents and people of Soviet Communist Party background. So they still haven't got a change, although those people are so afraid they dare not act against what the popular will is. So it is a difficult thing because it's an information war, isn't it? I mean, you have to have an understanding. You just can't be an inarticulate group of people saying we're unhappy.
Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah, it has to be understanding.
We're trying to curtail that system, this whole idea of having a powerful central government, with the idea of decentralization of power and of taxes. So we expect to put forth that idea, and have the most decentralized system as possible with the most decentralized tax system as possible. Whereas the central government becomes like totally redundant. Not redundant, but totally incapacitated to do any harm. Right now, it has a lot of power to do a lot of good, but it took that power to do a lot of harm. And so we want to.
You're talking about constitutional changes.
Absolutely, yes. We'll need deep constitutional changes. We've been through a cycle over the past 120 years of new groups of individuals of interest, new interest groups taking control of power, and they change the laws on their behalf, and they change it so much on their behalf that other people that are not within that system, that are outside that system, they fuel a revolt. They fuel the takeover of that system. So then this new group takes over, and the new group, they start changing their laws, and they start in order for them to benefit. And then there's a continuous disruption of our legal system over the course of 20, 30 years. That has been the average of the Brazilian Republic. If you look since 1891, which is the first constitution, then we had another one in 1934, then another in 1937, and another one in 1946, and another one in 1967, and another one in 1988. So if you take the average, it's about 30 years, you have a disruption, and usually that disruption, the collapse of the constitutional system is a reflection of what type of group is in power. and
yeah.
we want to put the civil society in power. That's the only method that we're going to be able to establish a system where civil society has a control. And in order for it to have the control, it has to be decentralized. It has to be far away from these unnatural aggregations. Even at the state level, state government, it's already a too high level of an aggregation. It shouldn't have as much power as the individual cities as a collective. So we have a reverse pyramid here in Brazil. We have all of the cities in Brazil. They do not have as much power as the central government. The central government is the all-powerful, but it should be less powerful than all the cities, correct? So that's what we need to change. We need to reverse that pyramid. We need to make all the cities more powerful as an aggregate group than the centralized aggregation. So in order for us to do that, we need to we need to get this message across to a lot of people. And we need new legislation to be passed to that effect. And so, you know, I hope to avoid a new constitution, because I don't believe that we have the representatives that will take us to that conclusion. That has to come from the outside and push in and alter this current constitution with the people that are there right now. Otherwise, if we wait until we get the people that will represent us on this issue, I'm afraid that we're going to not be able to do that over the course of time. Just time will basically grind this idea away, and then we're back with the centralized unitary system. So I think that's one of the things that will mitigate some of these issues. It might create a lot of other issues, for sure. You know, no system is really perfect. You're going to create like local oligarchies and local groups that have their local power, but it's not going to be like the overwhelming power of these big conglomerate, you know, construction companies, and then big banks that are taking over, and or big industrial conglomerates, or big interest groups that from the farm side. So, you know, you're shifting control of the government within these 3, 4, 5, 6 categories, and that's not the correct way to go.
Yeah, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's
we have a lot of things to do, and we believe that these 3 things can make the start. No, we do believe that the impeachment, or the president out anyhow, impeachment, renounce, resign, everything. The free speech is the second one. The third one is the machine vote. We need to stop these 3 things. We need to change it, and on 28th of this month, we're gonna start it in Brasilia, in our federal district, in our capital, and also we're gonna make this in all cities throughout the country, in the city councils. So I ask you, Jeff, and all the Americans supporting us, sharing these things as much as possible, because we need support on media. We don't have a free media in Brazil, so it's basically we depend on you in America and in Europe, sharing these hangouts, clicking on here if you like it, just like this talk show. And we didn't stop our thoughts here. We have a lot to talk, and I hope Luis Felipe can come back again and talk with us about all the topics. For example, we are working on recall here in Brazil. We don't have recall here in Brazil, Jeff. So we are working on this, and there are a lot of topics that we can share with you all. So I would like to thank you, Luis Felipe, again. Thank you very much to be with us.
Thank you. Anytime.
And Jeff, again, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been great experience, and wish you guys all the best of luck.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for paying attention to us, and I hope you get the message across, as Alan is saying. Hope to see you again.
Okay. Hope to see you again too, Luis.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you next time.